Let's talk about D&D. Hey everyone, I'm the Galestrom. I'm your father figure. I've been a dungeon master for over 15 years, and I realize that a lot of people are having issues jumping into the role of dungeon master because it's drastic. It's got this huge idea that you need to be hyper prepared for everything. You have to know every single rule. You have to know every single backstory, every plot hook, every lay of the land, every map, every cave in your head, and that's not the case. But when you're starting out, you don't know that. So I wanted to go over a few things that I wish I knew when getting started as a dungeon master. So the first thing is, you don't need to know every single rule in the book to get started. You need to know the core concept. How to roll a die, what stats help you do what. Knowing that strength is going to help you lift a door, but wisdom's going to help you know if someone's lying to you, you know? And I feel like a lot of people think you need to have every single rule memorized when you're doing this, and you really don't. You just need to know what's going to help people get by. And I think that's a really large barrier to entry for a lot of new dungeon masters out there, is trying to figure out what's necessary. So I think just learning the core rule set, everything included in the starter guide, in the starter kit, which I'll leave a link to down below if you need to get a copy of it. There's a bunch of free resources that'll get you started. Any rule, like how does counterspell work? How does flanking work? Is flanking optional? How to multi-class? Stuff like that. You worry about that later the fact. No one's gonna care if you have to open up your rule book and take a look to see, oh, what is the DC of a base spike trap that someone set up in the middle of the night? How much cover do you get for having 3/4 of your body behind it? That stuff you can always look up at during the fact. No one's gonna get mad at you. No one's gonna get upset if you say, well, I don't know. Get used to saying I don't know. It helps. Another thing that I really wish I knew when I started to actually GM a lot of games was finding out what kind of game people wanted to play. Because in my head, everyone wanted high fantasy, at least when I started. They all wanted Lord of the Rings. They wanted Harry Potter. They wanted fantasy Star Wars, but you'd be surprised what kind of games people want to play, especially when they come from different walks of life. They have experienced different kinds of fiction. Someone reading Harry Potter is probably has a different idea than someone who's only read Lord of the Rings, right? One might want super high fantasy, magic's everywhere, you know, there's sky cities, and someone might want this grim, dark fantasy, like something like Dragon Age or like Warhammer. They're so varying that it's okay to ask people what they want. I do it every time I start a new game these days. I ask people, what kind of game do you want to be in? Do you want political intrigue? Do you want subterfuge? Maybe, perhaps, you just want to have a wonderful little two-shot adventure where you're a bear looking for honey in a honey heist. That's okay as well. Like just ask your players what they want from a campaign or a short one-shot. Do you want to be an animal? Do you want to be a robot? Ask them. You'll be surprised to see what they tell you. You don't always got to use pre-written material either. I think that's one thing that a lot of people get hung up on as well, is I have to run this pre-written stuff that Wizards of the Coast has allowed me to run, and you don't. You can choose to run your own stuff from the get-go. Start your own world of Toonville, or you can run their own custom stuff that they've written. You can run Ravenloft. You can run in Faerun. You can run in your own custom world. I do that all the time. I will actually say that my custom setting is in Faerun at a different time, and people love that because then I can choose bits and pieces that I like without needing to know everything. In one campaign that I ran what was supposed to be a one-shot of the Forge of Fury, a pre-written adventure from the Tales of the Yawning Portal. But it ended up being its own campaign. So I made new cities, but I still used the Faerunian map because it was fun. And I could have reference points, and I reinvented what these places were. it gave people something physical, the actual map of Faerun to hold on to, but I could put my own spin on it. And that gives you a lot more leeway. So when someone says, well, that's how it was supposed to be, it's like, well, no, this is a custom world using their base. It's like making a soup. Everyone can use the same base to the soup, but maybe a little paprika, a little cumin. Maybe someone drops a whole goddamn mango in that salsa, and bam, you got something new altogether. But if you want to linger and you want to use pre-written stuff because it's your safe zone, that's fine too. No one's gonna judge you for it. No one's gonna think any less of you. Do what feels comfortable to you as a game master. It's important that you're comfortable at the utmost while you're running the game, because then your players are gonna love the game that you run, you know? I think the next one is going back into rules. Rules are not the be-all end-all. You don't have to say, well, cover gives you 3-force protection, so you get a +8 to your AC, blah, 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 blah. No, you can straight up say, yeah, this thing is flimsy. It doesn't give you much cover. It's going to go right through. Or, no, you're actually not hidden because, you know, of this ulterior circumstance. They being your players, can cite rules all they want, but in the end, it's a guideline. Run the game how you want to run it. If you want to say that you don't need magical components to cast spells at any point in time, except for this one circumstance, that's up to you. It's the rules are built around trying to get you to a good point, so you understand how the world by default works, not how it always works or how it should be. You know, a lot of people on Twitter often ask the wonderful folks over at Wizards for their input, and a lot of the time they say the same thing. It's a guideline, man. Don't read into it like it's the law, you know? Make your own law. You want Fireball to be a frost spell? By God, it's a frost spell. I'd say the next thing you should learn to do as a good GM, or when you're just starting out, is learn how to say yes. No player wants to be told, no, I'm not allowed to do something, you know? You can't do this thing because of X. Explain to them in their own terms why it's generally a bad idea or why it's not possible. If your player says, I want to jump across this pit. It's like, well, you want to jump across a 15-foot long pit as a human with one leg. If you just reiterate things back to the player in a way that gives them the most information that they as a character would have, it really helps them out. Now, if your player says, I want to try and fly, well, if they have the appropriate circumstance, fuck it, let them fly. There's a giant pit on the ground and they might fuck up. Let them fuck up. Let them fail. Let your players fail. It teaches valuable lessons about what's possible, you know? And I think that's really important going into new games, especially with newer players as well. Like, newer players are a godsend because they don't know what the limitations are. They want to try to do everything. And I think that's good. That's healthy. And it reminds a bunch of the older players, yeah, stuff can be weird. Let it be weird. If you want to play a cleric who specializes in exotic weapons without any proficiencies, yeah, it's not going to work very well, but let them do it. There are some things that you should be aware of when running a new game as well, is death is fine. I know a lot of people are really afraid of death in tabletop. This character you've been working on for the last 6 months plus, you've made new relationships with people, you've made friendships, and all of a sudden they die. Either in combat or, you know, to environmental hazards like falling down a pit. They perish. They cease to be, unable to be resurrected. And while that sucks, it makes a very real threat in your game. And I know a lot of DMs are afraid of killing off players or NPCs, but you have to embrace things like that. The death of an NPC that's been with you since session 1 is a very powerful thing. I mean, you don't have to take the George R.R. Martin approach where you kill literally everyone in your book or in your campaign or setting, but don't be afraid to use that as a storyteller. Death is a very real and natural affair, and we shouldn't shy away from it unless that's not gonna help move your story along. Sometimes you got to kill that guard captain, so everyone knows who the real villain is. That leads me into the next thing. Knowing what kind of game you're running will also entail you actually talking to your players. Your players are gonna be informing you about not only the kind of game that they want to have run, but also what they're comfortable with. I can't tell you how many horror stories I hear about people who deal with sexual abuse and child kidnapping and all this other stuff, and the players are just telling me that they're incredibly uncomfortable. More recently, we all remember that issue with a particular dungeon master on Twitch who had his players go through an encounter like that, and it was incredibly awkward for everyone because it was something that nobody expected and no one was prepared for, and people have real world traumas that we as GMs need to be aware of, need to make sure that we don't reintroduce, because there's a lot of people out there who don't want to don't want to drudge back up these awful memories or these emotions. So just having that conversation of, hey, what are you guys not okay with? I want to make sure that you're comfortable at my table, you know? Nobody wants to have that conversation, but sometimes it's a little necessary. And it doesn't have to be something super serious. It's like, hey, I want to make sure you guys have a good time. What do you guys not want to have happen? Or what are you not okay with? And a lot of the time it's using your common sense. Sexual abuse, kids, don't do that. Don't do that for shock factor. Don't let your players date your NPCs in general. That can lead to some really weird conversations, and I know a lot of people don't want to involve that at the table because that gets a little bit too intimate, and that can make some of the other players feel a little bit more uncomfortable, if not for you as the GM to feel uncomfortable. I know I don't want to fucking date my players. Most of my players are my friends, and I don't want that. But yeah, another thing that I think is really important is giving each player a time to shine in the game. It doesn't have to be in combat. Not everyone needs to have this huge combat encounter. Sure, fighters and barbarians, they want to do what they do best. Killing dudes with big weapons. Rogues want to be stealthy. Wizards want to have access to arcane magics. Warlocks want to be a demon or whatever. But give them out of combat things to do. And sometimes that's just like talking to your players as well, saying like, hey, I know you're a fighter, but you put 14 in intelligence. Did you plan on going Eldritch Knight? Do you want me to set up an encounter for you? And sometimes it's just putting like breadcrumbs in front of them as well. I once had a player who was an artificer, and his whole idea was he just wanted to build a train. He didn't care about combat stats or anything like that. His character's goal in life was to build a train in this fantasy world. So I gave him breadcrumbs. I was like, yeah, you can try and learn from all these other artificers and try and get little bits and pieces from different things to help you build these pieces. And he would spend hours crafting actual diagrams to relate it to fantasy. He was a big fan of Discworld. But it was his goal in life to do that. And I think that was really cool. That was really great. And it inspired the other players to start thinking, what are my goals? What do I want to do? Because he kept shoehorning these ideas in. Every time he's like, well, I have an idea for a steam-propelled engine. And I got it from this guy's tea kettle. It's like, oh, okay, cool. And I tell him, make an intelligence check. Make a wisdom roll. Whatever was applicable at the time to try and lock that in. And I told him like every couple of times that he would succeed, he'd get a pip or a point, and he would unlock a new power to create this train. And by the end of the campaign, he built a fucking train that ran into an entire town because that's what he wanted to do. And he set up like trade systems and all this other stuff, and it was great. It was a wonderful time. And setting up your players for that kind of setting, for that kind of scenario is really key. Find out what your players want to do and give them the opportunities to do it. Sometimes a rogue doesn't want to be a rogue and they think, oh, well, maybe I want to go fighter. Maybe Maybe they want to hang out with the guard captain for a downtime episode, or a downtime session, and they just vibe. They just hang out. He teaches the rogue how to use a battle axe or how to parry with a shield instead of a blade. And then you talk to that rogue. You're like, hey, do you want to take a level in fighter this next level? Or do you want to get a special feature because you did this for this amount of time while everyone else was out drinking and gallivanting? You were training. And reward them for that. Reward them for spending their downtime. It's important. Anyway, this is just a couple things that I think that I wish I knew going into dungeon mastering. And yeah, what did you guys wish you knew going into it? Or as a player, what did you wish that you knew? Maybe we'll do a video on that in the future. But that's it for us. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like the video if you like it. And I don't see you. See you later.